It's a rough life. Living up to Lassie, it's a rough life. Trying to be so classy when I'm going through the garbage for a midday snack. Knowing I'm in trouble when the folks get back. It's a rough life. When fleas live on your belly, it's a rough life. When people call you smelly, I'm developing a complex. I might need a shrink. They blame me every time that something starts to stink. It's a rough life. Begging for a cookie is a rough life. Never getting nookie. They chase me from the kitchen when I start to beg. They think that I'm perverted when I hug their leg.
Hi, welcome to the show. My name's Jesse Goldberg, and my guests today are Steve Karr and James Flexer, and we're going to talk about a book that you guys wrote called All About Tennessee Personal Injury.
Yes.
Now, before we get into the book, just tell me a little about yourself. You're the one whose name is on the law firm, so.
Right.
Right. So tell me about yourself, where you're from, and all that kind of thing.
Okay. Well, I'll start at the beginning, if that's okay. I was born and raised in Nashville. Was born in Baptist Hospital on 11/7/1956 in room 711, and I weighed 7 pounds and 11 ounces.
Okay.
So, but I went to Woodmont Elementary School, right, which, and then went to Montgomery Bell Academy, or MBA they call it, from 6 to 12. And from there, I went to Rhodes College in Memphis. Southwestern Memphis is what they called it at the time. Went to law school down in New Orleans at Tulane, and came back to Nashville in 1981, and didn't have enough sense to know any better, so I put a shingle up and I started my law practice. From there, I starved for several years, during which time Steve and I were roommates, and we'd known each other since we were kids, and we got an opportunity to, well, we wrote a book called Nashville Trivia at that time,
right, which is, we happen to have right here.
Yeah, which is how we got into the author business originally, thank you. And Trivial Pursuit, it was the mid-'80s, Trivial Pursuit was all the rage. And so we would sit around, the two of us and a couple other buddies, and just talk about old things that were used to be in Nashville, commercials, things like that. And one of these nights, we said, you know what, why don't we write a book? So we decided to, and we did.
In the law, what got you into I know you're a bankruptcy specialist or something.
Yeah, that's what I do primarily.
I saw your name on the phone books.
Sure.
Flexer Bankruptcy or something
yeah,
like that.
Sure. Well, but we wrote this book when we were both starving lawyers and had the time to do such. But Steve joined my firm about a year ago, and it was a wonderful, just a good match for both of us at the time. And, you know, lawyers do what's called pro bono publico, which means for the good of the public. We're obligated and required to do certain work without compensation, et cetera. But there's many ways you can do pro bono work. Many people think of it as representing a client without charging them, that type thing. And that's how most people, quite frankly, do their pro bono work. But in addition to that, there's a lot of other ways to do pro bono work and for the public. And I'll be honest with you, I kept saying to Steve, I said, you know, there's so many commercials on TV and all this, there's so much people, but nobody ever really tells people how this stuff really works. So I said, we need to check around, and we did Google searches and looked for a good personal injury.
That's why you wrote this book.
That is exactly why we wrote this book.
Oh, okay, that's good.
And we felt like that people hear things from their neighbors, their coworkers, et cetera, about personal injury. But when we went looking, now look, let me say this, there's a lot of really good treatises and legal manuscripts about and trial manuals about personal injury, but they're all for lawyers, quite frankly.
They don't give you the real
And what
story.
we tried to do was make it for the normal person, the person who knew nothing, was a blank slate.
Right, somebody just got in a car accident.
Exactly, and what we tried to do was make it very simple, but we tried to dig deep enough to where when somebody finished the book, and it takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours to read it, they actually can kind of get their arms around this whole process of a personal injury.
Okay, now you're a personal injury specialist, but you mostly did What did you started out as a?
Yeah, I started
Your own
out as
shingle too?
Yeah, hung out my shingle and
Right.
started doing a lot of divorce work, family law work, and then got a little bit into the personal injury field because I had worked for a period of time for a lawyer who did a lot of personal injury work. So I decided, well, maybe I should get into this personal injury game too. And from there, I got into personal injury and workers' compensation and so forth. And that's really the way it's been since about 1987.
And
So
you're from Nashville too?
I'm from Nashville as well.
Born and raised?
Born and raised. Went to H.G. Hill Elementary School, Hillwood High School, Vanderbilt, Nashville School of Law. I've been here just about all my life.
Right. Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Let's
All
hope
right,
there's a few years left.
Let's get into this personal injury thing. Now, let's start. Who wants to start with the types of cases that personal injury and the most common personal injury cases?
Well, the most
car accidents.
Car
and
accidents
slip and
is the
fall.
vast majority of. Now there are some premises liability suits, and then there's, but primarily auto accidents.
Okay,
by and far
let's
is the
just take an
greatest.
auto accident. Let me get to an auto accident. Now, this is before any lawyers are called or anything like that. But what?
Sure.
I'm in a car accident. What's the next step? What's going to happen to me next?
Go ahead. We talk about it in the
Yeah.
book as the steps to take.
Well,
And
I think the first thing, of course, to do is to call 911. And if you can, try not to move the vehicles if you're able to,
Right.
because you want the officer to have a good, clear shot of what happened.
And if you're not at fault, look around for witnesses. That'll
Well,
help you.
of course. And of course, nowadays, you've got
Cell
cameras
phones.
on your phone.
Right.
So folks takes pictures and that sort of thing. So you want to tell someone to take a picture. And then, if you're hurt, you need to go to see a doctor or an emergency room physician, hospital just as soon as you can. And the reason for that is because, if you're going to make a claim, you want the insurance company to know, hey, this is real, this happened, he didn't wait around, she didn't wait around. And those are the
But sometimes
elements.
injuries happen the next day.
Right.
Soft
And-
tissue injuries.
And sure, and that happens a lot with back and necks. It won't hurt that day, primarily because the adrenaline's running and so forth. And then the next day you wake up and your neck starts hurting, your back starts hurting. Then you need to go check yourself out to the emergency room or your primary care physician and go be checked out.
Well, let's go further along. When the insurance, you get the other person's insurance information, they get yours. Let's pretend they both have insurance, right? What's the next step that an individual will do that doesn't involve an attorney?
Well, the first thing you're going to want to do, I think, is if you have the other person's insurance information, and of course if you have your own, it's a good idea if you have your own, of course, to call in the claim.
Right.
Because you may need to use your own insurance at some point. But if you know the other person's insurance company, you're going to try to make a phone call to them. But the most important thing that you shouldn't do is to give a recorded statement if you've been
That's
injured.
good information.
And the reason for that is number one, let's say you're on medication. You might not remember what you said, or you might not know exactly what you're saying.
Or you might admit something that you don't want to admit.
Exactly. I
Exactly.
mean, keep in mind, insurance adjusters who manage these claims, they do it for a living.
Right.
And it's kind of like being cross-examined in a trial.
Right.
And if they can get you, or if they can put words in your mouth, so to speak, or shade what you're saying, of course, it's all being tape recorded. And of course, all that will be held against you down the road.
Well, in another life, I used to do this, right?
Yes.
And I used to go against I used to see the same insurance attorneys on the other side all the time.
Oh, you're a lawyer too,
Right,
of course.
and they would
Okay.
first, what would they first do? The first statement was, "Look, we're not trying to trick you. We're not trying to. We just wanted the truth from you, right?" But they're really
What that really means is we are trying
right.
to trick
that really
you.
means they're trying to trick you. So be careful what you say to anybody.
Absolutely.
And most important now is there's another form of surveillance, and that's Facebook and Twitter and,
Oh,
and
yeah.
Instagram.
All the social media.
And all the social media.
So if you think you're injured,
If you think you're injured and you've told the insurance company you're injured, and a day or two later you're posting pictures of yourself climbing Mount Everest, that's going to be used against you. I promise, because the insurance companies are watching for that.
Right, and they check that out.
Absolutely, they check that out.
I guess the higher the claim, the more they're going to check it out.
Of course, of course.
Right.
And that's certainly going to be a question that would be asked in discovery.
Right.
Insurance companies, though, have been using private investigators and surveillance as long as I've been practicing, which is 35 years or so, 36 years. So there's nothing new about it, but the fact is, with Facebook, other social media, it is so, people just don't think about it, and they'll wake up or have a bad day or whatever and maybe type in something that's offensive as well, that once again
so keep your mouth shut,
goes to their character.
And stay off of social media.
I think that's a really good recommendation.
And by the same token,
advice.
excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but by the same token, we as the plaintiff's attorneys can use that as well, because there are times that the person who's the tortfeasor, the wrongdoer, or the person who caused the accident or whatever, they may post something too, and they may post something that really incriminates them. So of course you're going to want to print that out and keep that for the file.
I just was a witness. I wasn't a witness to the accident. I heard the accident, but kids I was with witnessed an accident. It was like 2 days ago. And the kid was 14, and he went up, and I said, tell him what you saw. Tell him what you saw. He saw exactly the opposite of what the other witness saw. So it's like...
That's not uncommon,
Yeah.
right?
Not uncommon.
And both of them think they saw exactly... I mean, they're both telling the truth in their own mind. That's absolutely right. But...
and you hear that in criminal law, too. I mean, sometimes eyewitness...
I think one thing about doing personal injury is different than criminal law. Criminal law, somebody's freedom is at stake.
Right.
And the personal injury is just money all the time.
That's
well, and that goes to really a nice segue into one reason we wrote the book, too, is that a lot of people, if they watch the O.J. Simpson trial, even if they watch Perry Mason, they got an idea of how a criminal case works, so to speak. But there's really not, I mean, there's things like the People's Court, Judge Judy, et cetera, but it really is, that is not a great representation of how a lot of civil trials work and operate.
Yeah, that's very true. So, when is the point when most people seek an attorney?
A lot of times, there'll be folks that'll seek an attorney when they can't get the other insurance company to cooperate with them.
It seems to me like the insurance company is going to pay more attention to an attorney than he is going to pay to somebody who just was in an accident.
Well,
or maybe be more likely to give a higher settlement.
They certainly will get in contact. Once you're represented, they're going to get in contact with that attorney, and they're going to want some information, and that's fine. But they're not going to get a chance to talk to our client if we can certainly help.
Now, everything you wrote in this book is as if there was no attorney. Right?
That's correct.
Right? So it's somebody doing it on their own.
Right.
Which I don't recommend to do it on your own.
No. It's a little like dentistry. You can do it, but we don't recommend it. So, yes.
And we give a lot of tips. I mean, we do give some tips. And
well, it's good to know, because it's like that thing you said about social media just now.
Yeah.
Was very important. And there's also, I learned something in here in this book that I never knew, that Tennessee has a limit on the amount you can recover, $750,000 to $1 million or something?
$750,000 in non-economic damages. That means like loss.
Punitive damages.
Well, no, that's like loss of enjoyment of life, pain and suffering.
Does it include punitive damages?
No, punitive damages is goes outside the veil. Okay, that's a whole different form of damage, designed to punish.
Maybe a good idea would be one of you to explain damages. What are damages?
Well, the Tennessee statute, as we go into in the book, kind of divides damages into two types: economic and non-economic. The economic would be the lost wages, the medical bills, things that you can put numbers to and add up. Things that are a little more subjective, like pain and suffering, those are non-economic damages. And so under Tennessee law now, there are, as you were saying, limits to how much in the non-economic damages. Now, there's not limits to the economic damage.
Correct.
So
correct.
if you have literally $1 million or more in medical bills, every bit of that, there is no limit on
Correct.
that as far
That's
as what
correct.
a judge or jury could
Once
award
there's a
you.
settlement, right? Say the thing is settled for $100,000, right?
Okay.
How much goes to the lawyer? How much goes to the doctors? How much goes to the guy,
Well,
injured guy?
Of course, that all depends. Typically, in our office, we would charge a 1/3 attorney fee, 33 1/3%.
Unless it goes to trial, right?
Well, no, we pretty much keep it at 33 1/3%. We have not gone into the higher, attorney fee.
So if it's a $100,000 settlement, you would get $33,000 plus your expenses,
what our
right?
expenses are. That's correct. And then of course, you may have what are called medical liens or subrogations.
Okay. Well, back to that.
Yeah, sure.
Back to the attorney's thing.
Sure.
So you would get first you take the expenses off the top, and then you divide it by 1/3, right?
Well, no, we would take the third out of the 100,000, and then we'd take the expenses out, and then there would be what's left, and then of course there may be some medical liens, medical subrogations, expenses. If it goes into litigation, like
Now,
depositions.
if I had
and so forth.
insurance, how does that affect anything?
If you have insurance,
Right.
well, there could be an effect in the event that the wrongdoer doesn't have enough insurance, and you have what's called uninsured or underinsured.
No, I didn't
I'm
mean
sorry.
car insurance. I meant medical insurance. If I have
Oh,
medical insurance,
I'm sorry.
how does that affect
Oh,
what the doctors
Right.
get?
Okay. So what happens with medical insurance is this. Typically speaking, let's say you have some form of health coverage.
Right.
What will happen generally is the health insurance company will not usually charge dollar for dollar for your medical expense, and they'll pay so much. Let's say your medicals are $20,000, but the insurance company only pays like $5,000 or $6,000. So in essence, you would owe the health insurance company $6,000, the amount that they paid.
Right.
And of course, we would try at the end of the day
To get
that
down.
reduced.
Right.
Well, there's a concept called subrogation, and I
Correct.
want to back up just a moment because a lot of auto policies might have what's called med pay.
Correct.
So the med pay of, let's say, the med pay of the insurance, that would be paid first out of to pay the medical bills of, let's say, the person who's injured.
Okay.
And then they would want to get their money back from the party at fault. In other words, if the insurance company, the party at fault,
Right.
didn't immediately get in touch with you and they weren't being cooperative, but you still needed to go to the doctor, you would first use your own auto insurance med pay. A lot of
I don't know
times
if I
it's a-
have that. I don't even know if I
you
have
have to. Some policies have it, some don't.
Some don't.
And most times, if you do have it, it's going to be about $5,000. Okay. So if let's say you had an injury where they did pay out the full $5,000, they're going to want their money back from the party at fault. Then, if that person has
And
insurance,
if I'm at fault, they pay it anyway. I mean, say it's if I get med pay, would
your insurance company, the med pay
they
would
would
be
cover
at the
it?
person who got injured, but it wasn't their fault. Okay.
What if both people? Oh, okay.
And if
All right.
Yeah. Your med pay coverage covers you as the injured party, okay? And then eventually, at the end of the day, that insurance company, that automobile insurance company who paid your initial expenses, is going to want their money back from the wrongdoer, okay?
Right.
But,
But if I'm the wrongdoer, does MedPay cover that at all?
Does it cover you
You,
as the
if I'm-
wrongdoer? No.
Okay, that's what I want to know.
So, and what happens though is that, if you have to use your own medical pay insurance on the very front end, but you still have additional medical treatment, you have to go to physical therapy, et cetera.
Right.
By that time, one of a couple of things will have happened. Either the party at fault, their insurance company will be in touch and they will start paying for that
Right.
medical treatment, or if they're still being difficult, or the person who had the wreck hard to get in touch with them, and he's not reporting it or she's not reporting it to their own insurance company, then you're going to then have to rely upon your own hospitalization or your own medical policy that you have.
Right.
Now, certainly at the end of the case, if it's determined that the other side is at fault, then these insurance companies that have paid out this money to you, they're going to want their money back from the party that was at fault.
Right.
And so, but a lot of times, by the time that you've exhausted your own med pay, and many times you don't even have to use it, and that would be another reason to try hard to get in touch with the party that you feel like is at fault. And keep in mind, every case is not a rear ender where it's pretty straightforward who's at fault. A lot of times, both parties are pointing the finger at the other one.
What is the comparative negligence rule in this state?
In this state, comparative negligence is this. We used to be what we call a contributory negligence state.
Right.
And that would be, essentially what that would mean is that if the defendant could show that the plaintiff, the injured party, was at least 1% negligent, then you couldn't recover at all.
Really tough. Yeah,
really tough. And so in 1992, there came a case where the Supreme Court of Tennessee decided, no, that's a very onerous, that's a very tough rule. We're going to go in line with the rest of many of the other states in the United States and go to comparative fault. So comparative fault is this: if you, as the plaintiff, can show that the other party was more than 50% responsible, then you, as the plaintiff, can recover. Example: the defendant is 51% responsible for the accident. I, as the plaintiff, are 49% responsible according to the judge or jury. Then I can recover 51% of what my total damages would be. So the jury or judge would say, okay, the damage award is $30,000, but the plaintiff's only going to get, X amount, 51%.
Right. Who determines the percentage?
Well, and if you go to a trial, if you go to a trial and it's a bench trial where there's only a judge, then the judge makes that determination.
Right.
In a jury trial, the jury gets a jury form, and they break it down, and they determine, how much in damages, but they also determine whether or not there's any comparative fault on each side.
So all these most of the cases are probably fairly small, so they probably never go to trial, right? Most of them don't go to trial.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mostly get settled. It's kind of formulas. I remember when I was doing workman's compensation or something, they had a formula for losing your leg, a formula for, everything was a certain amount of money.
Right.
Yeah. And it's different, though, with workers' comp. There's a whole different set of rules that go into that, and there's no pain and suffering and loss of enjoyment of life. It's strictly a formula.
Right.
I mean, cases are going to go to trial normally for one or two reasons. Either there is a good faith, serious dispute over who's really at fault, or there is, for whatever reason, an irreconcilable.
What kind of influence does the police report have? Because they're not there when the accident happened.
Well, the police report is, first of all, it's not admissible. You can't introduce that into court.
What kind of influence does it have on the negotiating parties?
Oh, well, yeah, it usually, at the outset, once you try to resolve your case, the insurance adjuster has that police report, and they usually have taken a statement from their own insured, and once they get that statement coincide with the police report, that's going to have a lot of influence on whether or not the case can settle, at least with the insurance adjuster.
Right.
Well, if the police report is at all favorable to the defendant or the party at fault, it's going to be a big deal, okay, to the adjuster, of course. And then if it's clear cut, then it is less likely to play as big a role.
But like I said, I was an ear witness to an accident just a few days ago, and somebody saw it, and they said two conflicting witness statements. They said exactly the opposite things of what happened.
Well, if you've got a conflict,
what's the police supposed to do? Supposed to just
look
at the way the accident happened and try to determine?
Sometimes they can sort of, they'll put down a narrative, and sometimes they'll put down whether or not someone was following improperly or someone was outside their lane because of the way the vehicles look. you know, and that sort of thing. That they can sometimes make that determination, but many times
But
they won't.
you're absolutely right. It's not the police officer who shows up after the wreck.
Right.
He was not an eyewitness. He didn't see it, hear it, etc., with his
Right.
own senses, and therefore that is not direct evidence. And so his reconstruction of the facts and that type thing, it can be entered into evidence if you bring the police officer in, but it depends on the purpose for which you're bringing him in. But he's just like anyone else, really, other than he's got, you know, some more specialized knowledge just by dealing with auto accidents on a daily basis. But his opinion is just one of the opinions, and you know, it's not so easy necessarily to get that into evidence.
Before we run out of time, let me ask this question. We used to have an adage that said, your case is worth 3 times the meds. Is that work at all?
That changed probably about the time we talked about if people remember the hot coffee case.
McDonald's thing?
Yeah, the McDonald's case.
Okay.
Without using their name,
Oh.
but that's okay. But but that sort of changed the whole outlook of the industry. And
it still, though, is used as somewhat of a rule of thumb. Not a very, I mean, you can pretty much throw that rule of thumb out the window, but for whatever reason, old ideas die hard. And I mean, it does still have its place, even if kind of subtly in the negotiation process.
Especially the insurance company probably has that number in mind. Too.
They do. They have a number,
I think so.
and some even have machines that, you know, you plug it in, and this is about what the case is worth.
An algorithm to determine what your damages are worth, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember doing a lot of this stuff and going to and seeing the same doctor's reports, and the doctors, when you have soft tissue injuries, a lot of these doctor's reports look exactly the same. I mean, exactly the same, just the names are changed. So,
and that can happen too, and
that's up to the individual doctor as far as how he's doing it. But I understand what you're saying.
Anyway, you guys did a good service by doing this book, because it's Tennessee Personal Injury. Can you get this on Amazon or anything like that?
You can not only get it on Amazon, but you have to pay for it on Amazon. Whereas if you'll call our office or email our office, we'll be happy to send you one.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
great.
That's the idea behind it, is that we want to get it out to the public. We can't thank you enough for helping us do that.
Yeah,
but that was the whole purpose behind writing it, quite frankly.
Oh, well, I think I'll call you every day and get another podcast.
Well, that's fine. That's fine. If you want to.
And I personally want to thank you for putting me on television, even though I have a face for radio. So,
everybody looks good next to me. That's all I can tell you. Anyway, we better get going. My guests today were James Flexer and Steve Karr, and the book is Tennessee Personal Injury, and call them and you'll get a free book. My name's Jesse Goldberg, and we'll see you next week with another edition of the show.
It's a rough life, living up to Lassie. It's a rough life, trying to be so classy when I'm going through the garbage for a midday snack, knowing I'm in trouble when the folks get back. It's a rough life when fleas live on your belly. It's a rough life when people call you smelly. I'm developing a complex, I might need a shrink. They blame me every time that something starts to stink. It's a